The ice in my glass was the only thing keeping me awake as the neon sign outside the window flickered with a rhythmic, buzzing hum that seemed to vibrate right through my skull. I knew I had stayed too long, but the world outside felt too cold and the walk to my apartment felt too far for a girl who had finished 3 martinis on an empty stomach. I reached for my purse, but as I tilted my head, I caught a glimpse of them in the darkened reflection of the bar's mirror. 2 men sitting in the back corner booth, perfectly still and watching me with an intensity that made the alcohol in my system turn into a cold block of lead. They weren't talking, they weren't laughing, and they hadn't touched the 2 full glasses of beer sitting on the table in front of them for the last 20 minutes. The bartender was busy in the back room, and the heavy thud of a crate being moved was the only sound coming from behind the counter. I felt a sudden, sharp prickle of intuition at the base of my neck telling me that if I walked out that door right now, I wouldn't be walking alone. I fumbled with my phone, trying to focus my blurry vision on the screen, but the battery icon was a thin red sliver that looked like a warning sign. Why did I stay so late? Why did I think a quiet drink at a lounge 3 blocks from the club was a good idea? My hands were shaking as I tucked my hair behind my ear, trying to act like I hadn't noticed them, but I could feel their eyes tracing every single one of my movements. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy and disconnected from my brain, and I made a show of looking at my watch like I was meeting someone. I headed toward the restroom, hoping there might be a back exit or at least a window I could crawl through to escape the silent pressure of their gaze. The hallway was narrow and smelled of stale lemon cleaner, and as soon as I turned the corner, I heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy wooden booth sliding across the floor. They were up. They were moving. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, and I realized with a surge of panic that there was no back door, only a small, frosted window that was bolted shut with layers of old paint. I locked myself in the stall and sat on the toilet, pulling my feet up so they couldn't be seen from under the door. I held my breath until my lungs burned, listening to the heavy, deliberate footsteps entering the restroom area. The door creaked open, and the light from the hallway was cut off by a large shadow that stretched across the floor tiles. One of them was standing right outside my stall, and I could hear his slow, rhythmic breathing just inches away from the wood. "I know you're in there, sweetheart," a voice whispered, sounding far too calm and far too close. "You left your phone on the bar, and we just wanted to make sure you got home safe." I knew my phone was in my purse. He was lying to get me to open the door, and the realization made a cold sweat break out across my forehead. I didn't say a word, hoping that if I remained silent, he might think I had slipped out another way. But then I heard the sound of a metal blade clicking into place. The serrated edge of a knife slid through the gap in the stall door, slowly moving the latch toward the unlocked position. I had seconds to react. In a moment of desperate, drunken clarity, I grabbed the heavy ceramic lid of the toilet tank with both hands, lifting it with a strength I didn't know I possessed. As the stall door swung open, I didn't scream. I lunged forward with everything I had, swinging the heavy lid at the silhouette in the doorway. It connected with a sickening thud against his shoulder and head, sending him stumbling back into the sinks. I didn't wait to see if he was down for good. I bolted past him, my heels clattering on the tile as I burst back into the main bar area. The second man was standing by the exit, blocking the only way out, but the bartender had finally emerged from the back room with a heavy mallet in his hand. "What's going on here?" the bartender shouted, his voice booming through the empty lounge. The man by the door looked at me, then at the bartender, and finally at his partner who was stumbling out of the restroom clutching a bleeding temple. Without a word, the 2 men turned and ran out into the night, disappearing into the shadows of the alleyway. I collapsed onto a bar stool, my breath coming in ragged gasps as the adrenaline began to fade and the reality of how close I had come to disappearing settled into my bones. The bartender called the police, and as the sirens began to wail in the distance, I realized I would never be the last patron at a bar ever again. I was safe, but the memory of that silent reflection in the mirror would haunt my reflection for the rest of my life. The heavy bass from the party was still thumping in my ears as I drove down the narrow, unlit stretch of Highway 42, my vision slightly blurred and my head spinning just enough to make the yellow lines on the road look like they were dancing. I knew I shouldn't have stayed for that last round of drinks, but the air in the car was cool, and I figured the 20-minute drive home would be enough to clear my mind. Suddenly, a violent jolt rocked the frame of my sedan, followed by the sickening, rhythmic flapping sound of rubber shredding against asphalt. I gripped the steering wheel as the car pulled sharply to the right, my heart leaping into my throat as I realized I had hit something substantial laying in the middle of the lane. I coasted to a stop on the gravel shoulder, the silence of the woods surrounding the road feeling heavy and suffocating the moment I turned off the ignition. I stepped out into the humid night air, my legs feeling like jelly as I walked to the rear of the car to inspect the damage. The tire wasn't just flat. It had been sliced open by what looked like a jagged piece of metal purposely hidden inside a discarded cardboard box. I reached for my phone to call for a tow, but the screen remained black, having died minutes into the drive without me noticing. I was 3 miles from the nearest gas station, alone in the dark, and smelling faintly of the gin and tonics that were now making my pulse race with a frantic rhythmic heat. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance, growing larger and brighter until a rusted black pickup truck slowed to a crawl and pulled in directly behind my car. The high beams stayed on, blinding me and casting a long, distorted shadow of my own body across the pavement. A man stepped out, his silhouette tall and blocky against the glare, and he didn't say a word as he walked toward me with a slow, predatory gait. "Looks like you caught a bad break out here," he finally said, his voice raspy and devoid of any real sympathy. He wasn't looking at the tire, he was looking at my shaking hands and the way I had to lean against the trunk just to keep my balance. I tried to sound confident, telling him that my boyfriend was already on his way with a spare, but the man just tilted his head and let out a dry, rattling chuckle. "I didn't see any other cars for 10 miles back, and your phone is sitting right there on the bumper, dark as a grave," he whispered, stepping into the light so I could finally see his face. He had a jagged scar running through his eyebrow and eyes that looked like cold, glass marbles reflecting the moonlight. He reached out and grabbed my upper arm, his grip like a vice, and began pulling me toward the open door of his truck while telling me that it was far too dangerous for a girl in my condition to be left alone. The smell of old tobacco and something metallic wafting off his clothes snapped my brain into a state of survival that the alcohol couldn't dampen. I knew that if I got into that truck, I would never be seen again, and the highway would simply swallow my story whole. As we reached the side of his vehicle, I saw a heavy iron tire iron resting in the bed of the truck, just within my reach. I didn't think. I simply reacted with the raw, jagged energy of someone who refused to become a statistic. I swung my free arm back and grabbed the cold metal, spinning around and swinging it with a desperate, screaming force at his midsection. The blow caught him off guard, knocking the wind out of his lungs and forcing him to release his grip as he doubled over in the dirt. I didn't wait for him to recover or for the world to stop spinning. I turned and bolted into the thick tree line on the opposite side of the road. I could hear him coughing and cursing behind me, the sound of his heavy boots crunching on the gravel as he started to give chase. I ran blindly through the thorns and the low-hanging branches, the adrenaline numbing the scratches on my face and the ache in my lungs. I found a hollowed-out log near a dry creek bed and squeezed myself inside, pressing my face into the dirt and praying that the darkness would keep me hidden. For what felt like hours, I heard him prowling through the brush, his flashlight beam cutting through the leaves like a searching eye. Eventually, the sound of his truck engine roared to life, and the gravel sprayed as he sped away, likely fearing that the commotion would eventually draw a passing patrol car. I stayed in that log until the first gray light of dawn began to bleed through the canopy, my body shivering and my mind finally painfully sober. I walked 2 miles through the woods until I reached a farmhouse, where the sight of an old woman watering her garden felt like a miracle. I survived the night on Highway 42, but I learned that the most dangerous things on the road aren't the obstacles you hit, but the people who wait for you to stop. The sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shore usually felt like a lullaby, but tonight, after a bottle of wine and the heavy fog of exhaustion, the rhythmic thumping sounded more like a heartbeat echoing through the floorboards of the secluded rental. I had chosen this coastal town precisely because nobody knew me here, and the beach house sat at the very end of a dead-end salt road, surrounded by nothing but dunes and the whistling wind. I remember fumbling with the heavy brass key when I arrived, laughing at how my vision blurred as I tried to fit it into the lock, finally collapsing onto the oversized sofa without even bothering to turn off the porch light. The house was supposed to be my fortress, a place where the only thing I had to worry about was how long I could sleep before the sun hit the glass doors. I was drifting in that heavy, hazy middle ground between a drunken stupor and deep sleep when a sound from the foyer made my eyes snap open, though my body felt too weighted to move. It wasn't the settling of the wood or the wind rattling the frames. It was the distinct, metallic chime of the electronic keypad on the front door being engaged. My heart skipped a beat, then began to thrum with a frantic, sickening speed as I heard the heavy clack of the deadbolt sliding back, followed by the soft, slow groan of the hinges. I lay perfectly still on the sofa, my breath hitching in my throat as I realized that I had seen the owner's manual on the counter earlier, and it clearly stated that there was only one physical key and one master code. I didn't move a muscle, squinting through the darkness as a tall, thin shadow stepped into the entryway, silhouetted against the dim amber glow of the outdoor light. The stranger didn't rush. He moved with a terrifying, practiced silence, closing the door behind him and locking it with a soft click that sounded like a final judgment. I could hear his footsteps on the hardwood, slow, deliberate, and heading straight toward the kitchen where I had left my purse and my laptop. The alcohol in my system made the room tilt, but the sheer, icy terror of the moment was forcing a jagged sense of clarity into my mind. I knew I couldn't outrun him in my current state, and the open concept floor plan offered no place to hide except for the small, cramped laundry closet located just behind the sofa. I waited for the sound of him rummaging through my things, the clatter of silver and the rustle of papers providing a small window of noise to mask my movement. I rolled off the sofa and crawled on my stomach, the rough fibers of the rug scraping against my skin as I pulled myself toward the closet door. Every inch felt like a mile, and the curiosity of why he was here, why he had the code, burned in the back of my mind like a hot coal. Was he a previous guest? Or was he the person who had been watching me desde the dunes while I sat on the deck earlier that evening? I reached the closet and slipped inside, pulling the slatted door shut just as the floorboards in the kitchen groaned under his weight. Through the thin wooden slats of the closet door, I watched him walk into the living room, holding a long, heavy flashlight that he didn't turn on. He stood by the sofa where I had been laying only moments before, and even in the shadows, I could see the way he tilted his head, realizing the space was now empty and still warm. He let out a low, frustrated hiss that made the hair on my arms stand up, and he began to circle the room, his movements becoming faster and more aggressive. He started kicking at the cushions and throwing the decorative pillows aside, his breathing becoming a heavy, ragged growl that filled the small house. I clutched a heavy bottle of laundry detergent to my chest, my knuckles white, knowing it was the only weapon I had if he decided to yank this door open. He stopped directly in front of the laundry closet, the tips of his muddy boots visible through the bottom slats. I closed my eyes and prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years, holding my breath until my vision began to spark and fade. Just as his hand reached for the handle, a bright, sweeping light flooded through the floor-to-ceiling windows from the driveway outside. A loud, authoritative knock echoed through the house, followed by the heavy thud of a fist against the wood. "Police! We received a report of a suspicious vehicle parked on the Salt Road. Is everyone all right in there?" The man froze, his fingers twitching against the closet door for a second that felt like an eternity before he turned and bolted toward the back sliding doors. I heard the glass shatter as he forced his way out into the night, disappearing into the blackness of the dunes just as the officers kicked in the front door. I stumbled out of the closet, collapsing into the arms of the first person in uniform I saw, the tears finally breaking through as the adrenaline collapsed. It turned out a local neighbor had seen him following my car earlier and had grown suspicious when he saw him lurking near the keypad. I left that beach house before the sun even finished rising, and I never went back to that town again. I still have the physical key, but I keep it locked in a safe, a constant reminder that sometimes the places where we feel the most hidden are the places where we are the most visible.